I was watering my roses when I heard my daughter Sarah laughing in the kitchen. "Don't worry, Marcus," she said into her phone. "The old man will be in the nursing home by Christmas. Then this $2.3 million villa will finally be ours." She didn't know I was standing right behind the sliding door. My hands froze on the garden hose as the water kept running onto the already soaked petals. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The words hit me like ice water in my veins. I stood there, 67 years old, listening to my only child plan my destruction with the casual tone she'd used to discuss weekend plans. "The paperwork's almost ready," she continued. "Dr. Peterson says the dementia diagnosis will be official next week." I hadn't seen Dr. Peterson in months. My mind was sharp as ever, but apparently not sharp enough to see this coming. I stepped back from the door, my worn garden shoes silent on the stone patio. Through the kitchen window, I could see Sarah pacing, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light the same way her mother's used to. But Margaret would never have spoken about me like this. Margaret would never have plotted to throw me away like yesterday's newspaper. "Marcus thinks we should move faster," Sarah was saying. "He's already contacted Sunset Manor. They have an opening in December. December, 2 months away." I felt something cold settle in my chest, heavier than the autumn air. But that wasn't the worst thing she said. "The best part is, Dad actually thinks we moved in to help him." Sarah's laugh cut through me like broken glass. 3 years of free rent and he still believes we're here out of love. I remembered the day they'd arrived with their suitcases and sad faces. Marcus had just lost his marketing job, they said. They needed a place to stay while they got back on their feet. I'd opened my door without hesitation. Margaret had been gone 6 months and the silence in this big house was killing me slowly. I backed away from the window, my chest tight. The garden hose was still running, flooding Margaret's prized roses. I bent to turn it off, my hands shaking now, not from age, like they'd been telling everyone, from betrayal. "Dad's been so confused lately." Sarah's voice drifted through the glass. "Just yesterday he asked me where Mom was." "It's heartbreaking, really?" That was a lie. I'd asked her if she remembered how her mother used to make Sunday pancakes. A normal question from a grieving widower. But somehow, in their twisted narrative, it became evidence of my failing mind. I stood in my garden, surrounded by the roses Margaret and I had planted 20 years ago, and felt the weight of 3 years of manipulation settling on my shoulders. Every time I'd forgotten where I put my keys, they'd exchanged meaningful glances. Every time I'd asked them to repeat something, they'd made notes. The sliding door opened behind me. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was suddenly bright, cheerful. "I didn't know you were out here. You left the hose running." She walked over and turned off the water with an exaggerated sigh. "See? This is exactly what I was telling Marcus about." I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing Sarah's face, and said nothing. She was already performing for an invisible audience, documenting my supposed confusion for their records. I wasn't confused. I was devastated. "Why don't you come inside, Dad? It's getting cold." She took my arm with gentle firmness, the same way the nurses at Sunset Manor would in 2 months. Marcus made coffee. I let her lead me through the sliding door, through the kitchen where she'd just planned my exile, past the living room where Marcus sat with his laptop, probably researching nursing home costs. They thought they were so clever. They thought I was just a confused old man who'd be grateful for their guidance. They had no idea what I was capable of. I excused myself and walked to my study, the one room in the house they rarely entered. Margaret's portrait smiled down at me from above the fireplace, her green eyes holding secrets I was only beginning to understand. I sat at my oak desk, the same one where I'd built my construction business from nothing 40 years ago. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I opened the bottom drawer, the one with the lock Sarah and Marcus didn't know existed. Inside were documents they'd never seen, papers Margaret had insisted I keep just in case. At the time, I'd thought she was being paranoid. Now I realized she'd been preparing for war. The house deed. The trust documents. The will they thought they understood but had never actually read. Margaret's handwriting on the folder tab. For Harold, when you need the truth. I didn't know then that my life was about to be destroyed in the next 10 minutes, but I also didn't know that Margaret had left me everything I needed to destroy them first. "Dad, you left the stove on again," Marcus said that morning, pointing at the cold burner. I knew I hadn't touched it. That's when I understood they weren't just planning to steal my house, they'd been building a case against my sanity for months. I stared at the pristine stove, not a single pot or pan in sight, and felt the final piece of their puzzle click into place. Marcus stood there in my kitchen wearing the silk bathrobe I'd bought him last Christmas, pointing at evidence of my supposed incompetence that he'd probably staged 5 minutes earlier. His dark hair was perfectly styled even at 7 in the morning, his smile practiced and concerned. "You could have burned the house down, Harold." Harold. Not Dad. He'd stopped calling me Dad 6 months ago, around the time they'd started talking about my episodes. I walked to the stove and touched the burner, stone cold. If I'd left it on all night, it would still be warm. Marcus knew this. I knew this. But the performance had to continue. "I don't remember turning it on," I said, giving him what he wanted. The confusion, the doubt, the slow surrender of an old man losing his grip on reality. "That's okay," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false compassion. "We'll just have to be more careful, won't we?" He made a note on his phone. Everything was always noted, documented, filed away for future use. This wasn't the first incident. There had been dozens over the past 3 years, each one carefully orchestrated to paint a picture of my declining mental state. Keys moved from their usual spot, mail accidentally thrown away, appointments I'd supposedly made and forgotten, phone calls I'd allegedly agreed to, but had no memory of. But I remembered everything. I remembered the day Margaret died, how Sarah had cried real tears at the funeral, how she'd held my hand during the service, and promised she'd never leave me alone, how Marcus had stood beside her looking appropriately somber while his eyes calculated the value of the flower arrangements. 3 months later, they'd moved in. "Just temporarily, Dad," Sarah had insisted. "Until Marcus finds something." Marcus's marketing firm had folded, she explained. They'd lost their apartment lease. They needed help getting back on their feet. Margaret had always said family comes first, so I'd opened my doors without hesitation. That was 3 years ago. Marcus never found another job. "Harold," Marcus was saying, "I think we should talk about getting you some help around here. Professional help." He leaned against my granite countertop, the one Margaret and I had picked out together during our kitchen renovation. Now it belonged to him. In his mind, everything belonged to him. But that wasn't the worst part of their plan. The worst part was how easily I'd fallen for it. How I'd started questioning my own memory when they questioned it. How I'd begun to wonder if maybe I was losing my mind, if the grief over Margaret had broken something inside me that couldn't be fixed. I remembered Margaret's warnings now, the ones I'd dismissed as silly jealousy. "That man looks at our house like he already owns it," she'd said after their wedding. "Watch how his eyes move when he walks through our rooms. He's not seeing memories, Harold. He's seeing dollar signs." I'd laughed it off. Marcus was charming, successful, everything Sarah deserved after her divorce from that deadbeat first husband. He brought flowers, complimented Margaret's cooking, asked thoughtful questions about my construction business. He seemed genuinely interested in becoming part of our family. Now I understood. He'd been studying us, learning our routines, our vulnerabilities, our weaknesses. Margaret had seen through his performance, but I'd been blinded by my daughter's happiness. "I've made an appointment with Dr. Peterson for next week," Marcus continued. "Just a routine checkup. But I think we should discuss your episodes." Dr. Peterson, who I hadn't seen since my annual physical 8 months ago. Peterson, who apparently believed I was showing signs of early dementia based on Marcus's detailed reports of my confusion and forgetfulness. I nodded slowly, playing the part they needed me to play. The grateful old man, concerned about his failing mind, relieved that his loving family was taking care of him. "That's probably a good idea," I said. Marcus smiled. It was the same smile he'd given me 3 years ago when I'd handed him a key to my front door. Warm, trustworthy, completely fake. After he left for his morning jog, paid for by my monthly contribution to their household expenses, I walked through my house with new eyes. The baby monitor hidden behind the bookshelf in my bedroom, the small cameras disguised as smoke detectors in the hallway, the recording device tucked behind the picture frame in the living room. They'd been watching me, documenting my every move, building their case one manufactured incident at a time. Every stumble, every moment of ordinary human forgetfulness, every natural sign of aging had been twisted into evidence of incompetence. I found their files that afternoon, hidden in Sarah's old bedroom. Detailed notes about my behavior, photos of me looking confused or tired, phone records of calls to doctors, lawyers, and nursing homes. A timeline stretching back to the day Margaret died, marking every step of their plan. The folder was labeled Harold Williams Competency Documentation. I sat on Sarah's childhood bed, surrounded by the remnants of their betrayal, and felt something change inside me. The broken, confused old man they'd been creating was gone. In his place sat someone they'd never met before. Someone Margaret had trained for exactly this moment. I closed the folder and walked to my study. It was time to read the rest of Margaret's instructions. "Your father's getting worse, honey," Marcus told Sarah over dinner, not knowing I could hear every word through the baby monitor they'd hidden in my room. "Dr. Peterson agrees. Early dementia. The house sale needs to happen soon." I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to them plan my future with the casual efficiency of funeral directors. Sarah's voice was softer, uncertain. "Are you sure we can't wait a little longer? He seems fine most of the time." For just a moment I heard an echo of the daughter I'd raised, the one who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings and tell me about her dreams. "The lucid moments are part of the disease," Marcus explained with practiced authority. "Dr. Peterson says that's common in early stages, but Harold's clearly not safe living alone anymore. Alone, as if they weren't living in my house, eating my food, spending my money." "I just feel guilty," Sarah whispered. I had to strain to hear her. "He worked so hard for this house. Mom loved it here. And your mother would want you to inherit it properly, not watch it fall apart because Harold's too proud to admit he needs help." Marcus's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Sarah, he forgot your birthday last month. His own daughter's birthday." That was another lie. I'd remembered her birthday perfectly, had even bought her a gift, the pearl earrings she used to admire in Margaret's jewelry box. But when I'd given them to her, she'd looked confused and said it wasn't her birthday for another month. I'd felt foolish, embarrassed, exactly as they'd intended. But that wasn't the cruelest thing they did. The cruelest thing was how they made me doubt my own memories of Margaret. "Remember how Mom used to make those terrible banana pancakes?" Sarah would say, laughing. Margaret's pancakes had been perfect, fluffy and golden. I tried to correct her, but Sarah would give Marcus that look. The one that said, "See, he's confused again." They were rewriting our history, erasing Margaret's memory one false detail at a time. "The real estate agent thinks we can get $2.8 million, Marcus continued. "Maybe more if we stage it right. Tear out some of these old-fashioned features, modernize the kitchen." The kitchen Margaret and I had renovated 5 years ago, the one she'd planned down to the last cabinet handle. "What about Dad?" "Sunset Manor has excellent care. He'll be happier there, around people his own age. And the monthly fee is only $8,000. Only $8,000. From the sale of my house, paid with my money for the privilege of being warehoused until I died." I heard chairs scraping, dishes clinking. They were done planning my exile, ready to move on to evening television like any normal couple, but they weren't normal, and I wasn't the helpless old man they thought they were discussing. I got up and walked to my window, looking out at the garden Margaret and I had built together. 40 years of marriage, 30 years in this house, and they were going to tear it apart and sell it to strangers. They were going to put me in a home and visit me on holidays. If I was lucky. The next morning I called Dr. Peterson's office myself. "This is Harold Williams." I told the receptionist. I understand you've been getting reports about my mental state from my son-in-law? There was a pause. Mr. Williams, we can't discuss your medical information over the phone without— I'm not asking for information, I'm giving it. Marcus Chen is not my medical proxy. He has no legal authority to speak for me. Any reports he's given you about my condition are fabricated. My voice was steady, clear, undeniably competent. Another pause. Sir, perhaps you should come in for an appointment. We can discuss this properly. I'll be there Friday at 2 o'clock. And Dr. Peterson, I'll be bringing my own documentation of the past 3 years, including recordings of conversations where my son-in-law discussed falsifying my medical records. I hung up before she could respond. It felt good to be Harold Williams again instead of their confused, helpless victim. But I wasn't done. Not even close. That afternoon, while Marcus was at his daily job interview, actually 3 hours at the country club I paid for, I went through their belongings with the methodical thoroughness that had built my construction business. Sarah's purse, Marcus's briefcase, their shared laptop, their bedroom dresser. I found forged signatures on bank withdrawal slips, copies of legal documents they'd been practicing, a business card for a real estate agent who specialized in estate liquidations, a folder marked Power of Attorney's Rush Processing. Most damning of all, I found Marcus's journal. 3 years of entries detailing every step of their plan, every lie they'd told, every incident they'd manufactured. His handwriting was neat, organized, proud of his psychological manipulation. Harold is more susceptible to gaslighting than expected. One entry read, Sarah's guilt is becoming a problem, but her fear of poverty keeps her compliant. 6 more months of documentation should be sufficient for legal proceedings. 6 more months. They'd given themselves a timeline, a deadline for destroying my life. I sat in their bedroom, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, and felt something I hadn't experienced since I was young and hungry and building my first house with my bare hands. I felt dangerous. That evening they performed their usual dinner theater. Sarah asked how my day was. Marcus made gentle suggestions about simplifying my routines, both of them speaking to me like I was a child who needed careful handling. I've been thinking about what you said, I told Marcus, about getting help. Maybe you're right. His eyes lit up. Really? I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Harold. I'd like to meet with a lawyer, though, to make sure all my affairs are in order before I can't think clearly anymore. I let my voice crack just slightly, gave them the broken old man they expected. Of course, Marcus said quickly. I can help you find someone qualified to handle elder law issues. Actually, I'd prefer to use Margaret's lawyer, Elizabeth Chen. She handled our wills and trusts. I trust her. I watched Marcus's face carefully. The name meant nothing to him, which told me everything I needed to know. That sounds perfect, Dad, Sarah said, squeezing my hand. For just a moment, her touch felt genuine. But I knew better now. I'd learned to read their performances to see the calculation behind their concern. What they didn't know was that Elizabeth Chen had been expecting my call for 3 years. Margaret had prepared for this war long before it started. I found Margaret's letter in our bedroom safe, the one she made me promise to read only if our family ever betrayed me. Harold, it began. If you're reading this, then Sarah has forgotten who raised her. Here's what you need to know. My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages, written in Margaret's careful script during the final months of her illness. The letter was dated just 2 weeks before she died. She'd known. Somehow, while fighting cancer and managing her pain medication, she'd seen what I was too grief-stricken to notice. Marcus isn't who he pretends to be, she wrote. I hired a private investigator 3 months ago. His name is David Reeves, and his report is in the envelope behind this letter. Read it, Harold. Read it all. I pulled out a thick manila envelope, my heart hammering against my ribs. David Reeves' investigations. Inside were photographs, financial records, court documents, and a detailed report that made my blood run cold. Marcus Chen had done this before. Subject's previous marriage to Eleanor Vasquez ended in 2018, following attempted financial elder abuse of Mrs. Vasquez's father, Roberto Vasquez, age 72. Subject manipulated Mrs. Vasquez into believing her father was suffering from dementia, convinced her to pursue guardianship, and attempted to liquidate Mr. Vasquez's $1.8 million estate. Scheme discovered when Mr. Vasquez's physician became suspicious of contradictory medical reports. The photographs showed Marcus with Eleanor, a dark-haired woman who looked remarkably like Sarah. They were standing outside a courthouse, Eleanor crying while Marcus comforted her. The date stamp showed it was taken during their divorce proceedings. But that wasn't the worst thing I discovered. The worst thing was the list of other elderly victims Marcus had targeted over the past 15 years. Different cities, different methods, but always the same pattern. Charm the adult child, isolate the elderly parent, create medical documentation, liquidate assets. Margaret's letter continued. I confronted him 2 weeks ago. Didn't tell him about the investigation, just asked some pointed questions about his intentions toward you after I'm gone. Harold. The look in his eyes. I've never been so frightened in my life. Not of dying, but of leaving you alone with him. My wife had spent her final weeks protecting me from a threat I didn't even know existed. While I was focused on her treatment, her pain management, her comfort, she was building a fortress around our life together. I've made changes, Harold. Legal changes. The house can never be sold without both our signatures, and I've arranged for a posthumous signature verification system through Elizabeth Chen. Even if you're declared incompetent, the trust protections I've established will prevent any asset transfers. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed. Margaret hadn't just suspected Marcus, she'd outmaneuvered him. Every document they thought they understood, every legal loophole they'd been counting on, she'd already closed. There's more in the safety deposit box at First National. Her letter continued. Box 247. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my jewelry box. Elizabeth has the other key and instructions to open it if anything happens to you. I found the key exactly where she said it would be, hidden beneath the drawer that held her wedding ring, the one I'd been too heartbroken to touch since the funeral. Inside the safety deposit box were audio recordings, hours of them, labeled with dates and locations. The first one was dated 3 months before Margaret died. I pressed play and heard my wife's weak but determined voice. Marcus, I need to ask you something directly. What are your plans for Harold after I'm gone? Marcus's voice, smooth and concerned. Well, Margaret, we just want what's best for him. Sarah and I have been talking about how difficult it will be for him to maintain this big house alone. And you think he should sell it? Eventually, yes, when he's ready. The equity could provide excellent care for him in his later years. Care like a nursing home? A pause. Then Marcus, more carefully, if that becomes necessary, yes. Sarah and I would want him somewhere safe, somewhere professional. Margaret's voice turned sharp despite her illness. And where would you and Sarah live during this transition? We'd probably stay here initially, to help with the transition, make sure everything goes smoothly. How long do you think this transition would take? Another pause. Longer this time. That would depend on Harold's condition, his mental state. These things can deteriorate quickly at his age. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking with rage. 3 months before Margaret died, Marcus had already been planning my destruction. While I was helping my wife to the bathroom, bringing her medication, holding her hand through chemotherapy, he was calculating how quickly he could have me declared incompetent. There were dozens more recordings. Marcus talking to Sarah about my inevitable decline. Marcus researching power of attorney laws. Marcus contacting elder care attorneys about expedited competency hearings. But the most damaging recording was dated just 1 week before Margaret's death. Marcus's voice, speaking to someone on the phone. The old man's completely dependent on Margaret for everything. Once she's gone, it'll be easy to convince everyone he can't function alone. Sarah's already seeing signs of confusion, and I can manufacture more if needed. Margaret had recorded him confessing to a conspiracy to defraud me. While she was dying, She was building a case that would destroy him. Her final letter was brief. Harold, I know you'll want to forgive them. You'll want to believe Sarah was manipulated, that she didn't really understand what Marcus was doing. Don't. The recordings prove she knew. She chose him over you, chose money over family. When you're ready to fight back, call Elizabeth. She has everything, backups of backups, legal documentation, criminal evidence. She also has something else, the names and contact information of Marcus's other victims. They're waiting to help you. I sat in our bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of my wife's love and protection, and finally understood the depth of the war being waged against me. This wasn't just about greed or inheritance. This was about the systematic destruction of everything Margaret and I had built together. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated Margaret Williams. Even dying, even weakened by cancer and medication, she'd been 10 steps ahead of them. And now I had everything I needed to finish what she'd started. I picked up the phone and dialed Elizabeth Chen's number. It was time to introduce Marcus and Sarah to the real Harold Williams, the one Margaret had armed for battle, the one they should have been afraid of all along. I started recording everything. Every conversation, every lie, every time Marcus called me confused while stealing from my wallet. But the real evidence came when he didn't know I could still access the bank accounts online. 23 unauthorized withdrawals in the past 6 months, each one just under the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts. I sat in my study at 3 in the morning, scrolling through months of financial theft while the house slept around me. Marcus had been careful, never taking large amounts, always spacing out the withdrawals, usually timing them when I was distracted or grieving particularly hard for Margaret. But the pattern was clear. $50 here, $100 there, occasionally $200 for household expenses that never materialized. The credit card statements were worse. Dinners at expensive restaurants while I ate alone, clothing purchases at stores I'd never heard of. A weekend trip to Napa Valley that Sarah had told me was a work conference for Marcus's non-existent job. They'd been living off my money while planning to have me declared incompetent for being financially irresponsible. I installed my own recording devices the next day, tiny digital recorders that Margaret's investigator had recommended, small enough to hide behind picture frames and inside lamp bases, professional grade, voice activated, with enough memory to capture weeks of conversation. Within 48 hours I had them. The lawyer says we need more medical documentation, Marcus was telling Sarah in the kitchen. One doctor's opinion isn't enough for a competency hearing. We need at least 2, maybe 3 physicians to agree that Harold's condition is deteriorating. But Dad seems fine most of the time, Sarah protested. What if the other doctors don't see what Dr. Peterson sees? Then we make sure they do. Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, businesslike. We schedule appointments during his worst moments. After he's been drinking, when he's tired, when he's emotional about Margaret, we prime them with our observations, guide the conversation toward his confusion and forgetfulness. Marcus, that feels wrong. That's our testimony against my father. Sarah, your father is going to deteriorate anyway. We're just accelerating the timeline to protect everyone involved. Would you rather wait until he burns the house down or wanders into traffic? But that wasn't the most damaging conversation I recorded. The most damaging came 3 days later when they thought I was napping. Marcus was on the phone with someone, his voice low but clear through the device I'd hidden in the living room lamp. Eleanor? It's Marcus. I know we're not supposed to talk, but I need advice. Yes, it's the same situation. Elderly father-in-law, valuable property, adult child who's conflicted about the process. The difference is I learned from our mistakes last time. Eleanor. The first wife, the one Margaret's investigator had tracked down. Marcus was consulting with his previous victim about how to improve his technique. No, this one's much easier to manipulate than you were. Marcus continued. Sarah's desperate for financial security after her divorce. She'll do whatever I say as long as I frame it as protecting her inheritance. The house is worth almost $3 million. Even after nursing home costs, we're looking at substantial money. My hands clenched around the recording device. He was comparing my daughter to his previous victim, rating her compliance, measuring her greed. The old man's completely isolated now, Marcus went on. We've cut him off from his friends, his neighbors, anyone who might question our version of events. Sarah's the only family he has left, and she's fully committed to the plan. I heard footsteps upstairs, Sarah moving around in their bedroom. Marcus lowered his voice further. Listen, Eleanor. I know things ended badly between us, but this is different. I'm older now, more careful, and this time I'm not dealing with a smart woman who asks too many questions. Sarah just wants security. She'll sign whatever papers I put in front of her. The call ended, and I sat in my chair processing what I'd just heard. Marcus had called Eleanor smart for questioning him, while dismissing Sarah as easily manipulated. My daughter, who'd graduated summa cum laude from Stanford, who'd built her own marketing business before her divorce, was just another mark to him. That evening I called Elizabeth Chen from my locked study. Mrs. Chen, this is Harold Williams, Margaret's husband. I think it's time we talked. Harold, she said warmly. I've been expecting your call for months. Margaret told me exactly when you'd be ready to fight back. You knew about all this? She prepared me for everything. The recordings, the financial fraud, Marcus's pattern of elder abuse. She even predicted that Sarah would be the harder one to prove criminal intent against, since she could claim manipulation. What's our next step? Tomorrow you come to my office. We review everything, Margaret's evidence, your new recordings, the financial documentation, then we set a trap that Marcus won't be able to resist. What kind of trap? Elizabeth's voice carried the hint of a smile. The kind Margaret designed specifically for him. We're going to let Marcus think he's finally won right up until the moment we destroy him. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Margaret's final gift to me. She'd given me more than evidence or legal protection. She'd given me the chance to fight back with honor, to protect our legacy the way she would have wanted. Marcus thought he was hunting a confused old man. He had no idea he was walking into a trap set by the smartest woman I'd ever known. A woman who'd loved me enough to keep fighting for me even after death. Sunset Manor is really lovely, Dad, Sarah said, squeezing my arm as we toured the facility, and it's only $8,000 a month. What she didn't know was that I'd already spoken to the director and recorded everything she'd told them about my condition. I played along, nodding slowly, as the director showed us the dining hall where I'd supposedly eat my remaining meals. The facility was beautiful. I had to admit, polished hardwood floors, fresh flowers, tasteful artwork on every wall. The kind of place wealthy families chose when they wanted to feel good about warehousing their elderly relatives. The monthly fee would drain my savings in 12 years, assuming I lived that long. Mr. Williams, the director, Mrs. Patterson, said gently, your daughter and son-in-law have told us so much about your situation. We specialize in memory care, and I think you'll find our program very beneficial. Memory care. The euphemism for dementia patients. I looked appropriately confused, letting my shoulders slump slightly. I'm not sure I understand. Is there something wrong with my memory? Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. Sarah's eyes actually filled with tears, real ones, I think. For a moment I almost believed she was genuinely torn about this decision. Dad, we've talked about this, she said softly. You've been having some problems remembering things, small things, but the doctors are concerned. What kind of problems? I asked, playing the part perfectly. Marcus stepped in smoothly. Just last week you asked Sarah where her mother was. You seemed to forget that Margaret had passed away. Another lie, carefully crafted. I'd asked Sarah if she remembered her mother's favorite Christmas cookie recipe, a normal question from a grieving widower during the holidays, but in their narrative, it became evidence of cognitive decline. The important thing, Mrs. Patterson said, is that you'll be safe here. We have 24-hour nursing care, medication management, and activities designed to keep your mind engaged for as long as possible. As long as possible, the phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. Can I see one of the rooms? I asked, my voice small and uncertain. The room was pleasant enough. A hospital bed, a small dresser, a chair by the window that looked out on a parking lot. 200 square feet for the rest of my life, paid for with the sale of the house Margaret and I had built together. "This is lovely," I said, running my fingers along the generic bedspread. "Well," Mrs. Patterson consulted her tablet, "your son-in-law put down a deposit last month, so we've been holding the room for you. We could arrange admission as early as next week, once the paperwork is finalized." Next week? I felt ice in my veins. They'd been planning to move me in next week, probably as soon as the competency hearing was completed. But that wasn't the most shocking thing she said. The most shocking thing came when she walked us back to her office. "I have to say, Mr. Williams, you seem much more alert today than your family described. Sometimes that happens. Patients have good days and bad days." "Oh yes," Marcus said quickly. "Harold definitely has his moments of clarity, but the confusion episodes are becoming more frequent. Just this morning he forgot he'd already had breakfast and tried to make eggs again." I hadn't made eggs in 3 days, but Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically and made a note in my file. That evening, I sat in my living room while Sarah and Marcus celebrated in the kitchen. They thought I was watching television, but I was listening to every word through the baby monitor they'd hidden in my room. The same monitor I'd moved to the kitchen counter that afternoon. "I can't believe how well that went," Sarah was saying. "Mrs. Patterson seemed really understanding about Dad's condition." "She's seen it all before," Marcus replied. "Adult children struggling with elderly parents who can't accept their limitations. She knows the signs." I still feel horrible about this. "Sarah, you're doing the right thing. Your father will be safe, properly cared for, and we can finally move forward with our lives." "What about the house?" "I've already talked to the real estate agent. She thinks we can list it in January, have it sold by March. With the market the way it is, we should clear at least $2.5 million after costs." "That seems so fast." "Honey, the longer we wait, the more we'll spend on nursing home fees. Every month costs us $8,000 of your inheritance. The math is simple." My inheritance? They'd been spending my money for 3 years, and now they were talking about my death like a business transaction. I heard glasses clinking. They were toasting their success, celebrating the completion of their plan. In their minds, I was already gone. Just a confused old man who'd sign whatever papers they put in front of him. The next morning, Marcus approached me with a manila folder. "Harold, I've got some paperwork for you to sign. Just standard forms for Sunset Manor, insurance information, emergency contacts, that sort of thing." I looked through the documents with the careful attention to detail that had built my construction business. Mixed in with the legitimate nursing home forms were power of attorney papers, asset transfer documents, and something called a voluntary guardianship agreement. "This seems like a lot of legal language," I said slowly. "Maybe I should have a lawyer look at these first." Marcus's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Harold, these are just administrative forms. Nothing complex. Elizabeth Chen is expensive, and honestly, at this point, we need to be careful about unnecessary expenses." "But Margaret always said—" "Margaret isn't here anymore," Marcus interrupted, his voice sharper than usual. "You need to start making practical decisions based on your current situation." I looked at him. Really looked at him, and saw the mask slipping. For just a moment the concerned son-in-law facade cracked, and I glimpsed the predator underneath. "Of course," I said, reaching for a pen. "You're right. Margaret would want me to be practical." Marcus relaxed, his smile returning. "Just sign at the highlighted areas. I'll take care of filing everything." I signed my name carefully, deliberately, in my clearest handwriting. Harold Williams, fully competent and aware of exactly what I was doing. What Marcus didn't know was that every document he'd given me was legally worthless. Elizabeth Chen had already filed the real papers, the ones that would destroy him the moment he tried to use his forgeries. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was wait for him to walk into it. Elizabeth Chen smiled when Marcus swaggered into her office with forged power of attorney papers. "Mr. Williams," she said sweetly, "before we discuss your father-in-law's incompetency, I'd like you to meet someone. That's when I stepped out from the conference room. The look on Marcus's face was worth 3 years of psychological torture. His confident smile froze, then slowly dissolved into confusion, then fear. Marcus had prepared for this meeting like a chess master planning his final moves, armed with falsified medical reports, forged legal documents, and rehearsed explanations of my deteriorating mental state. He hadn't prepared to find me sitting calmly in the leather chair beside Elizabeth's desk, clearly competent and very much aware of what was happening. "Harold," Marcus said carefully, his voice still trying to maintain that concerned son-in-law tone, "what are you doing here? I thought you were at home resting." "I was invited," I said simply. "Elizabeth and I have been having very interesting conversations about you." Marcus looked between us, his practiced charm beginning to crack. "I don't understand." "Elizabeth, we had an appointment to discuss Harold's competency evaluation. These documents are forgeries," Elizabeth interrupted smoothly. She opened a thick folder on her desk. "Would you like to see the original documents, Mr. Chen? The ones Harold actually signed?" The blood drained from Marcus's face. "I don't know what you're talking about. Harold signed these yesterday. I watched him do it." "Yes, you did," I confirmed. "You watched me sign papers that Elizabeth prepared specifically for this moment. Every signature you witnessed was on a document designed to expose your fraud." Elizabeth spread out the papers Marcus had brought, comparing them side by side with originals. "These power of attorney forms, nullified by the trust structure Mrs. Williams established before her death. These asset transfer agreements, impossible to execute because Harold doesn't have individual ownership of the assets in question. These medical authorizations, based on falsified psychiatric evaluations from a doctor who's about to lose his license." Marcus sat down heavily. "This is ridiculous. Harold, you know you've been having problems. The confusion, the forgetfulness, the manufactured incidents," I interrupted. "Like the stove you turned on yourself, then blamed me for leaving on. Like the appointments you made in my name, then claimed I'd forgotten about. Like the medical symptoms you reported to Dr. Peterson that I never experienced." "That's not—" I was trying to help. Elizabeth placed a small digital recorder on the desk. "Would you like to hear yourself discussing this help with your ex-wife Eleanor? The conversation where you bragged about how much easier it was to manipulate Sarah than it had been to manipulate Eleanor." Marcus went very still. "You've been recording me?" "For months," I said. "Every conversation, every lie, every moment of your performance. Just like Margaret recorded you 3 years ago when you were planning this scheme while she was dying of cancer." I watched Marcus realize that everything he thought he knew about this family, about this situation, had been wrong from the beginning. He wasn't the predator, he was the prey, and he'd been walking into our trap for 3 years. But that wasn't when he finally broke down. He broke down when Sarah walked into the office. "Dad," she said, looking confused and frightened. "Marcus, what's going on?" Elizabeth gestured to an empty chair. "Please sit down, Sarah. We need to discuss your participation in the attempted fraud against your father." "Fraud?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't understand. We were trying to help Dad. By forging his signature on legal documents." Elizabeth placed copies of the falsified papers in front of Sarah. "By providing false medical information to doctors, by planning to liquidate his assets and put him in a nursing home against his will." Sarah stared at the documents, her face growing paler with each page. "These aren't— I didn't know these were—" "Didn't know what, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "Didn't know they were crimes? Or didn't know Marcus had done this before to his previous father-in-law?" Sarah turned to Marcus, her eyes wide with horror. "What is he talking about?" Elizabeth opened another folder. "Your husband's first marriage ended when he attempted to defraud Eleanor Vasquez and her elderly father. The same pattern, the same methods, the same outcome, criminal charges and divorce." "Marcus," Sarah's voice broke. "Is this true?" Marcus looked trapped, desperate. "Sarah, you have to understand, I was younger then. I made mistakes. This is completely different. Harold really is showing signs of dementia." "No," Sarah said, standing up suddenly. No, this isn't happening. Dad, tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them we were just trying to take care of you. I looked at my daughter, my only child, the little girl I'd raised alone after her mother's struggles with depression, the young woman I'd walked down the aisle with such pride, and felt my heart break one last time. Sarah, I said gently, I have recordings of you laughing about putting the old man in a nursing home so you could have my house. I have evidence of you helping Marcus document false symptoms of my confusion. I have 3 years of financial records showing both of you stealing from my accounts. She sat down hard, tears streaming down her face. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Marcus said we were protecting your future, protecting my inheritance. He said Mom would have wanted. Don't, I said sharply. Don't you dare invoke your mother's memory to justify this betrayal. Margaret knew exactly what Marcus was planning. She spent her final months protecting me from him, from both of you. Sarah looked devastated, but Marcus had recovered his composure enough to try one last gambit. This is all very dramatic, he said. But at the end of the day, Harold is an elderly man who's been under tremendous stress. His judgment is clearly compromised. No court will. Actually, Elizabeth interrupted, the district attorney will be very interested in these recordings. Elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud. These are felony charges, Mr. Chen. You're looking at significant prison time. The room went silent, except for Sarah's quiet crying. Marcus sat frozen, finally understanding that his game was over. I stood up, feeling older than my 67 years, but somehow stronger than I'd felt in months. Elizabeth, please proceed with filing the criminal charges. All of them. Dad, please, Sarah whispered. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. I looked at her one last time. No, Sarah, my daughter died the day you chose Marcus over me, the day you decided my love and my home weren't enough for you. I walked out of Elizabeth's office, leaving them to face the consequences of their choices. The trap Margaret had built had worked perfectly. Justice would be served. But as I drove home to my empty house, I realized that winning hadn't made me feel victorious. It had just made me free. The police arrived at my villa on a Tuesday morning. Marcus answered the door in his bathrobe, coffee cup in hand, still thinking he owned the place. Officers, he said confidently, if this is about my father-in-law's condition, we have documentation. Then he saw the handcuffs. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Margaret and I had installed during our 10th anniversary renovation. I watched from my kitchen window as Detective Rodriguez read Marcus his rights. Elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud. Each charge hit Marcus like a physical blow, his confident posture crumbling with every word. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind him, still in her pajamas, her face pale with shock. What's happening? Marcus, what's going on? Ma'am, you're Sarah Chen? Detective Rodriguez consulted his notepad. We have a warrant for your arrest as well. I couldn't hear her response from the kitchen, but I saw her knees buckle. Marcus reached out to steady her, but she pulled away from him with revulsion. Even in crisis, she was beginning to understand the depth of his manipulation. They were both handcuffed and placed in separate police cars. Marcus kept his head high, probably already planning his defense strategy. Sarah was crying, her hands shaking as the officer guided her into the back seat. As the cars pulled away from my driveway, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and profound sadness. But that wasn't the end of their story. The end came 3 weeks later, when the local news picked up the story. Elaborate elder abuse scheme uncovered, the headline read. Son-in-law accused of systematic fraud against elderly contractor. The news report brought Marcus's previous victims out of hiding. Eleanor Vasquez called me personally that afternoon. Mr. Williams, this is Eleanor Chen, Marcus's first wife. I saw the news report and I wanted you to know how brave you are for fighting back. Her voice carried years of pain and regret. I wish I'd been stronger when Marcus tried this with my father. I was so confused, so manipulated. By the time I realized what was happening, Dad had already been moved to a facility. He died there 6 months later, never understanding why I'd betrayed him. "You were a victim too," I told her. "Margaret's investigator found evidence of how Marcus manipulated you. Your wife sounds like she was an incredible woman. I'm sorry you lost her, but I'm grateful she prepared you for this fight. My father didn't have anyone looking out for him. Eleanor's father wasn't Marcus's only previous victim. 2 other families came forward, elderly parents who'd been isolated and defrauded by men matching Marcus's description. The district attorney realized they weren't dealing with a simple case of family conflict. They were looking at a serial predator who specialized in elder abuse. The evidence against Marcus became overwhelming. Audio recordings, financial documents, testimony from multiple victims across different states. His defense attorney, paid for with money stolen from my accounts, advised him to accept a plea bargain. Sarah's situation was more complicated. Her lawyer argued that she'd been manipulated by Marcus, that she was as much a victim as a perpetrator. The prosecutor was inclined to be lenient, especially after Elizabeth presented evidence of Marcus's psychological manipulation techniques. But Sarah made a choice that sealed her fate. She came to see me one afternoon, 3 days before her sentencing hearing. I found her sitting on my front steps when I returned from the grocery store, looking thinner and older than I'd ever seen her. "Dad," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I didn't invite her inside. We talked on the porch, surrounded by the roses Margaret had planted, while I waited to hear what she had to say. "I want you to know that I remember everything," she began. "Every conversation, every decision, every moment when I chose to go along with Marcus's plan. I wasn't confused or manipulated. I was scared and greedy and willing to sacrifice you for financial security." I sat down on the porch swing, studying my daughter's face. "Because my lawyer wants me to claim I was abused, manipulated, not responsible for my actions. He says I can probably get probation, maybe community service." She looked directly at me, her eyes clear and honest for the first time in years. "But that would be another lie, wouldn't it? Another betrayal." "Yes," I said simply. "It would be. I won't do it. I won't lie about what I did or why I did it. I'm going to tell the judge the truth, that I participated willingly in defrauding my own father because I wanted his money more than I wanted his love." We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the wind move through Margaret's rose garden. "Will you ever forgive me?" Sarah asked finally. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I'm proud of you for telling the truth. Your mother would be proud too." Sarah served 18 months in minimum security prison. Marcus got 5 years in federal prison and will be deported to Canada upon release. Their assets were seized to pay restitution to their victims, though that barely covered the legal fees and emotional damage they'd caused. But the real justice came from watching their carefully constructed lies collapse under the weight of truth. Marcus had spent years building a reputation as a successful businessman and devoted family man. Now his name was associated with elder abuse and fraud. Sarah had worked hard to rebuild her life after her first divorce. Now she was a convicted felon who'd betrayed her own father. They'd traded their integrity for money they never actually received, destroyed their futures for assets they never actually controlled. I kept the house, of course. Margaret's trust protections made their schemes legally impossible from the beginning. But more importantly, I kept my dignity. I kept my memories of Margaret. I kept the knowledge that I'd fought back instead of surrendering to their manipulation. 6 months after their arrests, I started receiving letters from other elderly victims of family financial abuse. Word had spread through social services networks about Margaret's preparation and my successful defense. Families were asking for advice, for resources, for hope. That's when I realized Margaret had given me more than legal protection and evidence. She'd given me a purpose for the rest of my life. I was going to make sure no other elderly person would face what I'd faced alone. She came back 3 months later, standing at my door in clothes I didn't recognize, thinner than I'd ever seen her. "Daddy," Sarah whispered, using the name she hadn't called me in years. "I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake." I looked at my daughter and saw a stranger. Prison had changed her, carved away the soft edges of the privileged life she'd lived at my expense, leaving someone harder and more desperate than the woman who'd betrayed me. She'd lost weight, her cheekbones sharp against pale skin. Her hair was shorter, dyed a dull brown instead of the honey blonde she'd maintained with expensive salon visits. But it was her eyes that looked different. They held a vulnerability I hadn't seen since she was a child, mixed with something that might have been genuine remorse. "May I come in?" she asked. "Please, just for a few minutes." I stepped aside and let her enter the house where she'd planned my destruction. She looked around the living room like she was seeing it for the first time. The family photos still on the mantel, Margaret's favorite chair still in its place by the window. Everything exactly as it had been before she and Marcus had tried to steal it from me. "It looks the same," she said softly. "Did you expect me to redecorate to celebrate your imprisonment?" She flinched at my tone but didn't defend herself. I deserved that. I deserve worse. We sat in the living room where she'd once planned my exile, the silence heavy between us. Sarah twisted her hands in her lap, a nervous gesture I remembered from her childhood. But that wasn't the most painful part of her visit. The most painful part was how much she looked like Margaret when she finally started talking. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," she began, "but I need you to know that I remember everything, not just the big moments, but all the small ones. Every time you came home from work covered in sawdust and still helped me with my homework. Every time you sat up all night when I was sick. Every time you told me you were proud of me." Her voice broke slightly. "I remember how you held me when Mom had her breakdown when I was 12. How you made sure I never felt like it was my fault, even though you were dealing with your own pain. I remember how you worked double shifts to pay for my college. How you never once made me feel guilty about the money. I waited for the manipulation, the request for money or help or forgiveness, but it didn't come. I remember all of that," she continued. "And I still chose Marcus over you. I still decided that money was more important than everything you'd given me. There's no excuse for that. There's no explanation that makes it okay." "Then why are you here, Sarah?" She looked directly at me. Her eyes filled with tears but her voice steady. "Because I wanted you to know that I understand what I lost. Not the house or the money. I understand that I lost my father. I understand that I threw away the love of the best man I've ever known for a lie told by the worst man I've ever known." I studied her face, looking for signs of the old manipulation, the calculated emotion Marcus had taught her to use, but I saw only exhaustion and grief. "The other inmates used to ask me about my crime," she said. "When I told them I'd helped my husband try to steal my father's house and put him in a nursing home, they were disgusted. Even criminals thought what I did was unforgivable. 'You don't betray family,' they'd say. 'You don't hurt the people who love you.'" She stood up, smoothing down her inexpensive dress. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, Dad. I know I don't deserve it, and I know you can't give it. I'm here to ask for something else." "What?" "I want to testify against Marcus in the federal case. His lawyer is trying to shift blame onto me, claiming I was the mastermind and he was just going along with my plans. I want to tell the truth about who planned what, who manipulated whom, who was really in control." This surprised me. Sarah's own lawyer had advised her to stay quiet, to avoid saying anything that might increase her sentence or expose her to additional charges. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do. Because I've done enough wrong things to last a lifetime." She paused at the door. "And because maybe if I start telling the truth about everything, I can find some way to live with myself." "What about your sentence? Testifying against Marcus could make things worse for you." "I don't care anymore. I spent 18 months in prison learning what it feels like to lose everything that matters. Losing a few more months of freedom doesn't scare me. Losing the last chance to do the right thing does." She opened the door, then turned back one final time. "I know you'll never be my father again. I know I killed that relationship with my choices, but I want you to know that even though I threw it away, I finally understand how precious it was." After she left, I sat in Margaret's chair and thought about the conversation. Sarah had sounded different. not just humbled by prison but fundamentally changed by understanding the magnitude of what she'd lost. For the first time since this nightmare began, I believed she was telling me the complete truth. But that didn't mean I could forgive her. 2 weeks later, Sarah testified in Marcus's federal sentencing hearing. She provided detailed testimony about his manipulation techniques, his previous crimes, his systematic psychological abuse of both me and her. Her testimony helped secure a longer sentence for Marcus and established the pattern of predatory behavior the prosecutor needed to prevent him from harming other families. It also resulted in additional charges against Sarah for perjury in her original plea agreement. She received an additional 6 months in prison for lying to the court about her level of involvement. She served that time without complaint, without appeals, without asking me for help with legal fees or character references. When she was finally released, she moved to another state. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she found work as a night custodian at an office building, that she lived in a small apartment, that she sent half her paycheck to a fund for elder abuse victims. She never contacted me again. Not on my birthday, not on holidays, not when I had minor surgery to repair a hernia. She'd kept her word. She understood that I was no longer her father, and she was no longer my daughter. Sometimes I wondered if I should reach out to her. If Margaret would have wanted me to find a way to forgive our only child, but then I remembered the recordings. The laughter about putting the old man in a nursing home, the 3 years of systematic betrayal. Some wounds don't heal. Some relationships can't be repaired. Some choices have consequences that last forever. Sarah had finally learned that lesson. I just wished she'd learned it before it was too late. I'm back to watering my roses every morning, just like before. But now when I look at this $2.3 million villa, I don't see the house they tried to steal. I see the home Margaret and I built, protected by her love even after death. The early morning light catches the dew on the petals. The same roses Margaret planted 20 years ago, somehow more beautiful now that I know how close I came to losing them forever. It's been 2 years since the trials ended. 18 months since Sarah's final visit, 6 months since Marcus was deported back to Canada. The house feels different now. Not empty like it did after Margaret died, but peaceful. The silence isn't lonely anymore. It's protective. It's mine. I've made changes. Small ones that matter to me. I converted Sarah's old bedroom into an office for the Margaret Williams Foundation for Elder Protection. The room where she and Marcus once planned my destruction now houses files on dozens of families I've helped defend against financial predators. There's something fitting about that transformation, something Margaret would have appreciated. The foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined. Elizabeth Chen serves as our legal counsel pro bono. We've helped 43 families in the past year, providing legal resources, investigative support, and most importantly, the knowledge that they're not alone. Most of the cases follow Marcus's pattern: adult children, manipulated by predatory partners, elderly parents isolated and gaslit until they doubt their own sanity. But that wasn't the most important thing I learned from this experience. The most important thing was that Margaret's love had been powerful enough to reach beyond death itself. I found her final letter last month, hidden in a place I'd never thought to look, taped inside the cover of our wedding album. It was dated just 3 days before she died, written in the shaky handwriting of her final weeks. "My dearest Harold," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you survived Marcus's betrayal and found your way back to yourself. I'm so proud of you, my love. I always knew you were stronger than you believed." She'd known I would need those words, known I would find that letter exactly when I was ready to read it. "I need you to know that everything I did, the investigation, the legal protections, the evidence gathering, wasn't just about saving our house or our money, it was about saving you. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you vulnerable to people who would exploit your kind heart and generous nature." I sat in our bedroom holding the letter with hands that no longer shook from betrayal but from the overwhelming power of being loved so completely. "You always worried that you weren't smart enough, weren't sophisticated enough, weren't worthy of the life we built together. But Harold, you were the wisest man I ever met. Wise enough to choose love over fear, generosity over suspicion, trust over cynicism. Those qualities made you vulnerable to Marcus. But they also made you the man I fell in love with 42 years ago. 42 years. We'd been married 42 years when she died, and she'd spent her final months protecting me from harm I couldn't even see coming. I want you to keep trusting people, Harold. I want you to keep opening your heart to the world, even after Sarah and Marcus tried to destroy it. Don't let their betrayal turn you into someone hard and suspicious. The world needs more people like you, not fewer. That's why I started the foundation. Not for revenge against families like mine, but to protect the kind, trusting elderly people who deserved better than exploitation. Margaret's letter had reminded me that my nature wasn't a weakness to be hidden, it was a strength to be shared. Finally, my love, I want you to know that our story doesn't end with my death or Sarah's betrayal. It ends with you choosing to keep loving, keep growing, keep building something beautiful in the world. That's how you honor our marriage. That's how you honor me. The letter was signed with her full name, Margaret Elizabeth Williams, the way she'd signed our marriage certificate all those years ago. I keep the letter in my shirt pocket now, reading it whenever I feel overwhelmed by the foundation work or lonely in this big house. It reminds me that I'm not a victim of Sarah and Marcus's betrayal. I'm a survivor of it, transformed by it, made stronger by it. Yesterday, I received a call from a woman in Oregon whose son-in-law was pressuring her to sell her farm and move into assisted living. The pattern was familiar: isolation from friends, manufactured confusion, documented incidents of forgetfulness. I walked her through the steps Margaret had taught me: secure legal counsel, document everything, trust your instincts. "But what if I'm wrong?" she asked. "What if I really am losing my mind?" "Mrs. Patterson," I told her, "confused people don't usually call foundations for help. Confused people don't research legal protections. Confused people don't recognize manipulation patterns. You're not losing your mind. You're fighting for it." After the call, I walked out to the garden and looked at Margaret's roses. They were blooming again, full and vibrant in the spring sunshine. I thought about the cycle of seasons, how things that seem dead in winter can come back to life when conditions are right. That's what happened to me. Marcus and Sarah thought they'd destroyed the man Margaret married, thought they'd reduced me to a confused, helpless victim, but they'd only pruned away the parts of me that were too trusting, too naive. What grew back was stronger, wiser, more purposeful. I'm not the same Harold Williams who overheard that phone call 3 years ago. I'm not the broken widower who almost lost everything to predators wearing the faces of family. I'm the man Margaret always knew I could become, someone who uses his pain to protect others, who transforms his experience into wisdom, who chooses love over bitterness even after betrayal. This morning I received a letter from Sarah. I didn't open it. After 2 years of silence, I don't need to know what she has to say. Our story is finished. Ended not with reconciliation but with justice. Some relationships can't be repaired. And that's okay. Some wounds become scars that make you stronger rather than injuries that make you weak. I placed her letter, unopened, in the fireplace and watched it burn. The flames reminded me of the warmth Margaret and I had shared for 42 years, the love that survived her death and my betrayal, and emerged stronger on the other side. Then I went back to my roses, back to my foundation work, back to the good life I'd almost lost and learned to treasure. Margaret was right. Our story didn't end with betrayal. It ended with me choosing to keep building something beautiful in the world. And that, I think, is the only revenge that really matters.